Sounds like a no. All right. I just noticed that my slide is a bit wrong. In this slide here, I'm talking about a BP statue thing. It's completely wrong, so I might have to update it a little bit later because it's still talking about things that are not in the slides anymore. So when you see BP statue, basically replace that with BP goal, but then the screenshots won't make a lot of sense. So I'll update that later. The next and final part is the HUD or UI and something called UMG, which stands for Unreal Motion Graphics, which is a nice user-friendly editor to create. So yeah, remember the difference. HUD is only the non-interactive part of a heads-up display shown in this screenshot. UI is a bit different. It can be interactive, like user can click on it or select options. It can also be, a UI can be either on the you're seeing here, or it can be in the world as well. That you see in some games, their UI is 3D and it's available in. And UMG is the editor you use to create. Right? So yeah, UMG, you'll see that it looks a lot like a blueprint. That's because it uses a lot of blueprint, but it has an additional mode for you to edit your UI. So you see at the top, there's a designer tab and a graph tab. Graph tab is basically the blueprint tab, event graph. So nothing new here, exactly the same as any other blueprint. But a designer tab is where you'll be creating your UI. This is where you'll be dragging all your UI elements and putting them together and editing the look of the UI. Important concept, a UI is hierarchy based. So it's very important where you put UI in relation to their parents, because it's a parent and child based kind of hierarchy. So depending on where you put a text box, for example, if a text box is a child of a button, then that text will be linked to the button, and then when the button moves around, the text will move around. This kind of thing. Another concept that's important is the concept of anchors, because UI is variable. A UI is never the same resolution for everyone, right? If I play in like 720p, the UI is not going to have to adapt as compared to someone who plays in like 1080p HD or someone who plays on a smartphone in portrait mode, right? The UI has to automatically adjust to your resolution and aspect ratio. And the way it does that is by using anchors. So when you place an item here, it's not on the screenshot, but when you place an item, you'll see that you can define anchors. Anchors basically mean, if I put an object here, I can tell it to try and be attached to one of the corner or any location on the edge, right? So let's say I put a box here at the bottom right corner, and I set its anchor to be bottom right. If the ratio changes, to be like portrait, like here, then the box will follow the bottom right corner, right? Will move along with the bottom right. And that's how you basically ensure that things are more or less in the same place with different resolution and aspect ratio. To create a new UI is pretty easy. It's the same as usual. You right-click somewhere, a new button in the content browser, and go to User Interface Widget Blueprint. Another important concept before I show you how it works is the concept of property binding. So when you create pieces of UI, the variables, sometimes you need to access variables. So, for example, you want to show the score of the game, right? You're going to have a text that says score, but then you're going to have another text that actually says the number that the current score is, right? So that will become a variable. But how do you update that variable? Because, the game mode doesn't really know what the variable, the UI doesn't really know what the current score variable is in the game mode at that stage. So we need to set it. We could use a bunch of functions and events, but that would be quite a lot of scripting. right? Because every time you score a game, you would have to call the UI somehow and then tell it to increment or this kind of stuff. This is where property binding comes into play. It's like a very easy way to tell a UI element, a property of a UI element, to be bound to another variable. What that means basically is for this variable here, for the text, every time that the UI needs to know the content of the text, so every time it renders that text, basically, it's going to call a function here that we call a binding function that is going to try and get the value of this text. As you can see on the screenshot here, when you create a binding, all it does, it has an input-output and it has an output data of type text. And then you can here give it the value of that text. As you can see, I've done here. I'm basically looking at the game mode, making sure I cast, and all I'm doing is getting my variable current score and giving it as a text to the return node. This will make a bit more sense once we start. But yeah, keep in mind that this is like a nice and easy way to tell a property to be bound to a variable and update by itself. You don't need to trigger any function anymore to update that score. And yeah, the last thing for UI to work is, by default, the UI doesn't show you've created in the content browser, but it needs to be added. Not only does it need to be like created, but it also needs to be added to the current viewport of the game, right? Because the game can have any number of viewports. You could have a split screen game where there's 2 viewports, or you could have even a single player game where sometimes you're in third person view, sometimes you switch to another camera, which is first person view, or sometimes you can be looking through another camera. So you need to tell the UI which viewport to kind of get into. And that's what we're going to look at now. So let's try and do that. We're going to create a new HUD, new piece of UI, and we're going to try and design it to show score and HP. And we're going to try and bind the value of the score to that current score variable we've just created in our game mode. And yeah, it's kind of more, and then yeah, we add it to the viewport. So let's try and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to add a new blueprint because we're not creating a blueprint this time. I'm going to go to user interface and select widget blueprint. Widget is the name of any UI element. So create that and code it widget HUD, maybe. There's probably a better name for this. And edit this. So now we're in the UI editor. I'll show you real quick what I meant by the anchors. So what I'm going to do is add a text. All right, you can see. So what I did was go in the palette here, and I selected text and drag and dropped it into the view. You can place it wherever you want. You can see on the right there's something called anchors. If you click on it, it's showing you different kind of position relative to the screen. I want to make it link to the bottom right corner, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click here, and you can see now when it's selected, there's that little weird icon. Now look what happens if I resize the square here, which represents the current resolution aspect ratio of it. If I resize that, you can see how the text block is linked to the bottom right corner, right? So this is how you ensure that different UI elements still keep the same ratio with different resolution. For our case, though, I'm going to set it to the top left corner and move it back. Wait. That was weird. Yeah, I'll move it back to the top left. And I'm going to change that text to be score. Cool. Then I'm going to pay attention here on the hierarchy because it's important how you lay out your things. So I'm going to add another text that's a sibling, right? And that text is going to be our number. So for now, I'm just going to say, and I'm going to put it right next to it. All right, so now I have my score, but I want that to be set to a specific value, right? So remember, we can bind this property, this text, to be of a specific variable by using a binding function. So let's do that. I'm going to click create binding, and that you can see automatically this creates a function for us. It also automatically switched us to the graph editing mode. And if you look on the left here on function, you have this thing called getText0. It's not a great name, but that's your binding function for that text, right? So now it's returning nothing, the text. Let's try and give it the current score value from the game mode, right? So first step will be getting the game mode. So I look for get game mode, that one. Remember that this returns a game mode base, right? It doesn't return our custom class. So we need to cast that to GM soccer game. Right, so now we have a cast node here. So I'm going to connect this to the input. And now I can use the output here that's giving us the game mode as our custom class, GM soccer game, to look for a variable called current score. So once you drag it, you can scroll down all the way to, and if you scroll down to default, I believe, yep, you will see the variables that you've created in your custom class. So now I can get current score here, and that gives us the current score. And now, remember, Blueprint can convert types for us. So I just want to put the number of the current score into the return value text. That's going to convert it automatically for us. And now all I need to do is connect the output of the cast to the return node. And that's basically it. That's all we need to do. So compile and save. I was going to add another piece of UI for health, but we're running out of time. So you can do that if you want. But I wasn't going to connect it to any log to show you. For now, let's just do the. So we have the score on the top left, no problem. It's all good. And we have our text updating to current score value.